On the last day I drove to the office after 31 years, I came home to find a note on the kitchen counter. It said, "We think it's best if you find somewhere else to stay. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I read it standing in my work clothes with a retirement cake box still in my hand. When they realized what I'd done next, the calls didn't stop for 3 days. I want to tell you how I got there, because it didn't happen all at once. Nothing like this ever does. I woke that morning the way I had every weekday for 3 decades. Alarm at 5:40, coffee in the dark, the particular silence of a house that doesn't know what day it is. I had laid my clothes out the night before, a habit my mother instilled in me so early I couldn't remember learning it. White shirt, the blue tie my daughter from my first marriage had given me years ago. Dress shoes I'd polished the Sunday before, because some things deserve ceremony. My wife was still in bed. She didn't get up to see me off. I told myself she was tired. She'd been tired a lot lately. Or at least, that was the word she used when she didn't want to be in the same room as me. I stopped at the bakery on Redmond Road, the one with the green awning and the owner who always called me by name. I ordered a small white cake with "Happy Retirement," James written in blue icing. The woman behind the counter said, 31 years, that's something. I agreed with her. It was something. I just wasn't sure yet what kind of something it turned out to be. The office gave me a card signed by people I'd worked alongside since some of them were in their 20s. There was a lunch, catered sandwiches, and those little bags of chips that always seem celebratory at certain ages. My supervisor shook my hand twice and said I'd left the place better than I found it. I believed him because I'd tried to. That had always been my operating principle. Leave things better. Hold up your end. Don't complain about the wait. I drove home with the cake on the passenger seat and the windows down, even though it was October and the air had teeth in it. I wanted to feel something clear. I remember thinking the sky looked the way October skies used to look when I was young, that particular blue that doesn't apologize for being brief. The driveway was empty when I pulled in. My wife's car was gone. My stepson's truck, which had been parked in my spot for 3 weeks because he said the transmission was making a noise, was also gone. The house had that particular stillness buildings get when no one has been in them for hours. I noticed it before I even unlocked the door. The way a place breathes differently when it's waiting instead of resting. The note was on the kitchen counter, exactly where I'd left my keys every evening for 6 years. Centered, folded once. My name written on the outside in my wife's handwriting, which was careful and pretty and had always looked more trustworthy than it turned out to be. "James, we've had a lot of conversations about this, and you never seem to hear us. We think the best thing is for everyone to have some space. Please find somewhere to stay for a while. We'll reach out when we're ready to talk. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I set the cake box down next to it. I read the note twice. Then I read it a third time the way you do when your mind is trying to make the words say something different than they say. There was no signature. As if the authorship didn't matter, or as if claiming it might require accountability they weren't prepared to offer. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table, the chair I had sat in every morning to drink my coffee and read the paper since before either of them moved in, and I sat down. Outside, a squirrel ran across the back fence. The refrigerator hummed. The house was mine. I had bought it in 2003, long before I met my wife, long before her son and her daughter became people I shared square footage with. My name was on the deed. My hands had painted every room. The deck out back I had built on weekends over 2 summers with help from my neighbor, Gerald, who brought his level and his opinions and left both at my house. I did not call her. I did not call her son, who was 31 years old and had been living in my house, rent-free, for 14 months because he said he needed to get on his feet. His feet, as far as I could tell, had been comfortable the entire time. I did not call her daughter, who lived 40 minutes away but drove to my house every Sunday to do her laundry and eat dinner and leave without helping clear the table. I picked up my phone and I called my attorney. Not in anger, in precision. "There is a difference," she answered on the second ring. I explained the situation in the same tone I used for everything practical. Direct, brief, no performance. She asked a few questions. I answered them. She said she'd need a few days to prepare documents. I said that was fine. Then I sat in my own kitchen and thought about how 6 years of a marriage could fit inside a folded piece of paper with no signature at the bottom. My wife and I met at a community fundraiser for the local library, which is the kind of place 2 people over 50 meet when they are trying to be intentional. She had good posture and a dry sense of humor, and she laughed at a story I told about my father that most people found too long. I took that as a sign of compatibility. I was wrong, but I was also lonely, which has a way of softening the edges of evidence. Her first husband had left when their kids were in their teens, not dramatically. He had simply made himself increasingly absent until the absence became permanent. Her son and daughter had grown up treating that departure as the wound that explained everything. Every difficulty, every failure, everything they didn't want to do, traced back to a man who had stopped showing up. I understood that. I had grown up without much consistency myself. I thought I could offer something different. I moved into her house first. Then 18 months later, we sold it and bought this one together. I paid the larger share of the down payment because I had been careful with money my whole life and she had not, and I didn't hold that against her. I told myself that a marriage was not a ledger. I believed that, mostly. The problem with believing something mostly is that the small part you don't believe has a way of getting louder over time. Her son moved in during the spring of last year. He was between jobs and between apartments and between, it seemed, any clear intention about what came next. He asked if he could stay for a few months. My wife said yes before I could formulate a response. Later, when I mentioned that a conversation in advance might have been appropriate, she said I was being rigid. I let it go. People like me are good at letting things go. It becomes a habit. Then it becomes a condition. He was not unkind, exactly. He was indifferent in the way of someone who has never been required to consider the feelings of the person providing for him. He ate my groceries and left his dishes in the sink. He had friends over on weeknights and didn't mention it until they were already parked in my driveway. When I asked him to contribute to utilities, he laughed in the way young people laugh when they think a request is absurd. My wife smoothed it over. She was good at that. She had practiced it for years. Her daughter came every Sunday. She was quieter than her brother, but her entitlement was just as comfortable, just less vocal. She used my streaming subscriptions and my Wi-Fi and the washing machine I had bought with a rebate and installed myself. She called my wife Mom in a voice that sounded like a closed door. She called me James the way you say the name of an appliance you rely on but don't think about. There were good moments. I want to be honest about that. Sunday dinners in the early years, when her son was still somewhere else and her daughter brought wine and the conversation was real. Saturday mornings when my wife and I drove to the farmer's market and she held my arm and I felt like I had built something that would last. Evenings watching the news on the couch, her feet in my lap, the dogs asleep at the end of the cushions. But something had been shifting for the past year in the way ground shifts before you notice the crack. My wife started taking calls in the bedroom with the door closed. Her son started speaking about the house in a way that suggested ownership was a matter of habit, not title. Her daughter started referring to decisions I'd made about the house as how things used to be, as if the present had superseded me. I raised it once. Sat my wife down at this same kitchen table and said I was feeling like a guest in my own home. She said I was being dramatic. I asked her when the last time was that she had asked my opinion before agreeing to something that affected both of us. She said I was keeping score. I said I was noticing a pattern. She got up and started doing the dishes, and the conversation ended the way all our difficult conversations ended. Not resolved, just stopped. I thought about my father. He worked for the same company for 38 years. He used to say that a man who cannot be honest in his own house has no foundation anywhere. I was 63 years old, sitting in my kitchen with a retirement cake I had bought for myself, and I understood finally what he had meant. I spent the next hour doing what I had learned in decades of practical work. I took inventory. The house was in my name. I had never added her name to the deed, partly because the refinancing had never happened the way we'd discussed, and partly, I realize now, because some quiet part of me had been paying attention even when I thought I wasn't. The mortgage was paid off. Had been for 2 years. The cars. My truck was mine. Clear title. My wife's car, I had been making the payments on for 3 years because she said the financing had been a mistake and I had stepped in. The insurance on both vehicles ran through my policy. Her son's truck, the one sitting in my driveway for 3 weeks with the allegedly troubled transmission. I was listed as the lien holder on the loan because he couldn't get financing on his own and I had co-signed because my wife asked me to, and I had confused loving someone with endorsing whatever they requested. Her daughter had a credit card connected to my account, a supplemental card from 8 years ago when she was going through a hard time. The hard time had resolved, but the card had not. I was also paying for my wife's cell phone plan. Both her kids on a family plan I had opened and expanded twice over the years. 4 lines. One mine. I sat there in the kitchen, not angry, something else. Clear. The feeling a room gets when you throw open the windows after a long winter. I thought about the note on the counter, about the phrase, "We've had a lot of conversations about this." We had not. What we'd had were a few moments where I had expressed something true and my wife had found a way to make my truth seem unreasonable. That is not a conversation. That is a performance of listening. I called Daniel, my oldest friend, the one who had been my witness at both of my weddings and had never once said "I told you so," though he had told me. He answered before the second ring, which meant he'd been expecting the call in the way old friends sometimes anticipate each other's difficult moments. I told him the short version. He listened without interrupting, which is a rarer skill than people realize. "You staying?" he asked when I finished. "This is my house," I said. "Good," he said. That was all he said about that. Then, "What do you need?" I told him I needed a night. He said his guest room was made up. I said I wasn't leaving. He paused for a moment and then said that also sounded right. I did not leave the house. That was the first decision, and it felt important. The note had told me to find somewhere else to stay. I chose not to be difficult, because the house was mine and I had spent a significant portion of my life building and maintaining and paying for it, and I was not going to spend my first night of retirement on someone else's couch because of a folded piece of paper. I put the retirement cake in the refrigerator. I changed out of my good clothes. I took the dogs out to the backyard and stood on the deck I had built and let the October air remind me that I was still present, still a person who occupied space that was legitimately his own. That evening, I began the administrative work. Not out of spite, out of accuracy. I was returning the situation to its true state, which was that I had been subsidizing people who had told me, in writing, that my presence was inconvenient. I called the insurance company first, separated my wife's vehicle onto its own policy, effective in 30 days as required. Noted the change of primary contact. The representative was professional and unhurried and did not require an explanation. I logged into the bank and removed the supplemental credit card tied to her daughter's account. I sent a brief notification that the card would be deactivated in 7 days, which was more notice than I had been given. The cell phone plan required a call to customer service. 20 minutes. I reduced the plan to a single line. Her line, her son's line, and her daughter's line would need to continue under their own accounts. I had the representative note the transition date as 30 days out. I was not trying to strand anyone. I was not interested in theater. The co-signed truck loan was more complicated. I spoke with the lender, explained I would no longer be acting as co-signer, and asked about the process for removal. They explained he would need to qualify independently or refinance. I said I understood. I sent a message to my wife's son through the only channel I had, a group text that had been used mostly for forwarding recipes and sports scores, informing him that the co-signing arrangement would need to be addressed within 30 days. I did not touch the joint bank account. I did not change the locks. I did not turn off the utilities or cancel the internet or do anything that would make the house uninhabitable. I was not at war. I was settling accounts. The last thing I did before I went to bed was write myself a note. Not on paper, just in my head. Something my father would have said and probably did say in some form. You are not being unreasonable. You are being accurate. There is a difference, and it matters. I slept better than I had in months. In the morning, I ate breakfast at my own table and drank coffee from my own pot and read the news on my phone in the quiet that the house offered when it was only mine. The dogs slept at my feet. Sunlight came through the kitchen window at the angle it always did in October, long and particular, the kind that makes ordinary rooms look like they are being considered. The first call came at 9:14. My wife. I watched her name on the screen and let it reach voicemail. Then her son. Then her daughter. Then my wife again. I was not ready yet. Not because I was gathering courage. I was not afraid of the conversation. I was waiting until I was finished, until every adjustment was made and documented, because I had learned from years of practical work that you do not explain a plan while you are still executing it. People get loud when they understand what's happening. Loud makes it harder to finish cleanly. By noon, everything was done. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and reviewed what I had done and what remained. The attorney was preparing documents. The financial adjustments were either complete or in progress, with proper notice given. I had not acted in anger. I had acted in order. I made myself lunch, A sandwich, the good mustard, sliced apple on the side, the small civilized pleasure of eating what you want when you want it without calculating anyone else's preferences. At 2 in the afternoon, I called my wife back. She answered immediately, her voice high and taut. "James, what is going on?" It was not a question. "I'm at home," I said. "I know you're at home. We can see the car." "I didn't leave," I said. A pause, then quieter. "What does that mean?" "It means I read the note," I said, "and I disagree with the recommendation." She exhaled something that was almost a laugh. "We need to talk about this." "We're talking now," I said. "Not like this." "When we're together? When things aren't?" "I made some changes to the accounts," I said. "I want you to know before you find out another way." The silence that followed had a specific texture, not stunned, calculating. "What kind of changes?" "I separated the auto insurance. I removed the supplemental credit card. I've adjusted the cell phone plan with 30 days notice. And I've notified the bank about the cosign situation on the truck." Her voice went sharp immediately. "James, you can't." "I can," I said. "I already have. You're punishing us." "I'm not," I said. "I'm adjusting things to reflect the actual situation." "The actual situation," she repeated slowly, like she was deciding whether to be contemptuous or frightened. "The actual situation is that you and your children left a note telling me to vacate my own home," I said. I took that seriously. "That was not," she started. Then she stopped. "That wasn't meant to be permanent. We needed space." "You asked me to leave," I said. "I chose to stay. I'm adjusting my financial participation to match the relationship you described in the note." Her daughter's voice appeared in the background then, asking what was happening. My wife covered the phone partially, but I could still hear her say his name in the tone people use when something has gone more wrong than they expected. "I can hear you," I said when she came back. She shifted again. "James, you're 63 years old. Where is this coming from? You've always been so steady." There it was. The word they use when they want to remind you that your function is to be a surface others stand on. "I am steady," I said. "That's why this is happening." Her son's voice cut in, louder. "Dad," he caught himself. He had never called me that, not once. "James, what did you do?" I didn't answer him directly. I said, "For your mother's benefit and yours, that I have not touched the utilities. I have not changed the locks. The house is available to your mother as it legally should be. But the financial arrangements that were built around a different understanding of this household are being corrected." "You're ruining everything," he said. I thought about that, about what everything meant, about the truck in my driveway and the Sunday laundry and the credit card and 31 years of careful work and the retirement cake I had bought for myself because no one else had thought to. "I haven't ruined anything," I said. "I've stopped carrying something I wasn't asked to carry. I was expected to." Her daughter got on then. Her voice was quieter than her brother's, more careful, more like her mother's. "James, I understand you're hurt, but my card." "Your card is transitioning," I said. 7 days notice was sent. "I'd suggest setting up your own account this week." "James," she said, and her voice turned plaintive in a way that might have worked before today. "We didn't mean it the way it sounded." I waited a moment. "The note said what it said," I replied. "I'm responding to what it actually said." My wife came back on. She was crying, or something close to it, the particular strain in a voice when it is trying to hold itself above water. "We are your family." I stood up and walked to the window and looked at the deck I had built, the planks I had sanded and stained twice, the railing I had replaced after a storm, the bird feeder I had hung so I would have something to watch on slow Sunday mornings. "Families don't leave notes," I said, "not without a conversation first, not without a signature, not to someone who has been paying their bills and sleeping in their house and showing up every day for 6 years." She started to say my name and I let her finish saying it. "I'll be home this evening," I said. "I'd like the house to be accessible when I get there. The rest we can discuss in person, reasonably, when everyone is ready to be reasonable." I ended the call before it could turn into a negotiation. My hands were very still. That surprised me the first time I noticed it, and didn't surprise me when I noticed it again. I took the dogs for a long walk through the neighborhood, the same streets I had driven home on for 20 years, before her, before any of this. The maples were at their best. That particular October abundance that doesn't last but doesn't apologize for being brief. I walked for almost an hour, and I did not rehearse any conversations. I just walked. When I returned, her car was in the driveway. They were in the kitchen. All three of them. My wife at the table, her son standing with his arms crossed, her daughter near the counter. The arrangement of people who have agreed on something before you arrived. My wife looked tired, not guilty, tired, which told me something. Her son spoke first. You need to undo what you did. I'm not going to, I said. You co-signed on that truck. That's illegal. I'm aware what it is, I said. I also know that responsibility flows in both directions. I've given 30 days notice, which is more than reasonable. This is unbelievable, he said. After everything. I looked at him the way I had looked at junior employees who believed that volume was an argument. I let the quiet sit for a moment. After everything, I said, let's talk about everything. He didn't have an answer for that. Her daughter tried a softer approach, the one that had always worked on her mother and sometimes on me. James, we got scared. We didn't know how to talk to you. The note was wrong, we know that. The note was clear, I said. I appreciated the clarity, actually. It helped me see something I'd been looking at sideways for a while. My wife's voice was low and controlled, the voice she used when she wanted to appear reasonable while feeling something else entirely. You had a plan. This whole time you had a plan. No, I said. I had a response. You made the plan. You planned to go somewhere and planned to leave a note and planned that I would accept the instruction and find somewhere else to be. I just responded differently than you expected. Her son sat down, which surprised me. Some of the fight went out of his posture. In a different life, in a life where things had been built more honestly from the start, I might have liked him. He was not a bad person. He was a person who had never been required to understand that things came from somewhere. What do you want? He asked. His voice was quieter now, and the question was real. I want what I should have asked for clearly a long time ago, I said. I sat down at the head of my table. I want this to be a household instead of a service. I want decisions made together instead of announced. I want to be treated like someone who belongs here rather than something this house runs on. No one said anything. And as of right now, I said, the financial arrangements reflect the truth of this situation. You and your sister are adults with your own means. Your mother and I have things to discuss, and we'll discuss them. But I am not going back to what this was. That is finished. Her daughter was crying quietly. Not for me. I don't say that with judgment, just accuracy. She was crying for the change in weather, for the inconvenience of a world that had shifted without consulting her. Her son looked at the table, then at me, then at the table again. You could have just talked to us, he said. I tried to, I said. You weren't listening. He didn't argue. That was something. My wife sent them both home an hour later. Her son would need to find other arrangements soon, which was a conversation I intended to have directly and soon. Her daughter drove away without saying goodbye to me, which I noted and sat down. My wife and I sat at the table after they left. The house was quiet in the way it had been quiet on my first morning there, before any of this, when it was just mine and full of possibility. She said, I don't know how we got here. I do, I said. Not an accusation, just honestly. She looked at me for a long moment. Are you done with me? I thought about that. About 6 years. About the farmer's market in the early days, and the way she laughed at my stories, and the way a life gets built out of small, true things before it gets built over. I don't know yet, I said. That's the honest answer. She nodded slowly. She accepted honest answers when they were given without cruelty. That had always been true. It was one of the things that had made me believe, once, that we could figure most things out. We're going to need a real conversation, I said. Not through the kids, not around things, a real one. She said she knew. We sat there for a while longer in the kitchen that was mine, in the house that was mine, while the October light moved across the floor the way it does in late afternoon, slow and without apology. The dogs came in and settled on the rug. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside, a neighbor called a child in for dinner. I did not feel victorious. I want to be clear about that. There was nothing to win here. There had only ever been a life that needed to be lived honestly, and a version of me that had confused being needed with being valued, that had mistaken steady for invisible, that had paid for access to a place where I already belonged. Her son was gone within the month. He found an apartment with a friend and managed it without my co-signature, which told me everything about the nature of the previous arrangement. Her daughter and I reached a kind of working civility. The Sunday dinners resumed eventually, smaller and more honest. She set up her own cell phone plan, and I believe it made her feel more independent than she'd expected to feel. My wife and I went to counseling. I will not tell you it was comfortable. It was not. I will tell you it was real, which was more than what we'd had for the last several years of performance and smoothing over. Some things were fixed. Some things could not be fixed. What remained was simpler and more clearly itself. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a career and 6 years building something I thought was a life. And I have spent some time figuring out the difference between the two. The difference, as far as I can tell, is consent. A career asks something of you and you agree to give it. A life should do the same. On the first Saturday after everything had settled, I got up early and took the dogs out and stood on the deck in the November cold with my coffee. The bird feeder needed filling. I filled it. A cardinal came almost immediately, which my mother would have taken as a sign of something. I just took it as a cardinal. Daniel called that afternoon to check in. I told him things were quieter. He asked if quieter was good. I looked around the kitchen, at the walls I had painted and the shelf I had built and the table where I had sat every morning for 20 years. The retirement cake was long gone, but I could still remember exactly how it had looked on the counter next to that note, and how I had made a choice to stay, and how that choice had changed the temperature of everything. Quieter is honest, I said. And honest is the only thing I have ever really known how to build. He said that was enough. I agreed with him. It was enough. It was, for the first time in a long time, exactly enough. If this story found you at the right moment, if you have ever stayed somewhere quiet and useful until you forgot you were allowed to leave, I would like to hear from you. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me whether you think I waited too long or moved too soon. The comments are open and I read them. We share stories here on this channel every week, and each one is just a person trying to figure out the same thing. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one.